that flow on those Bivos. Hey all. So when I did my first kind of like first impressions video about this bike, the Specialized Chisel Hardtail, I got some comments about seat tube angle, and I just think that's a really interesting topic. So I wanted to, I tried to respond to some of those in the comments, but I wanted to do a little video about this bike and talk a little bit about, what I think about seat tube angle and how that relates in different circumstances, different bike designs and everything. So this being a, cross-country hardtail, tires are semi-level here. You can see I have a lot of drop. I'm low in the front end, fairly aggressive position, and it's relatively short travel, and there is no suspension in the back. To me, this is a really big thing because I think the whole steep seat tube angle movement, I would say it's not a trend, because it's a really positive thing in a lot of ways for a lot of bike designs. I think that really comes into play most with full suspension bikes, and even more so, like more specifically with long travel full suspensions. And it just has a much smaller effect with a hardtail. And I would say the simplest way to think about that is on a hardtail, like if you're going up something steep, so you're on some steep incline, your weight is transferred back, and on that full suspension, that's going to be changing your center of gravity, your center of balance, your center of mass. I think it's the latter there, the final one, center of mass, and it's going to be putting all your weight on the rear suspension, and that's going to be tending to sit you down into that suspension more. It's also going to be unweighting the front suspension, so the whole bike, where if you're riding on a flat level surface, your sag is even. Suddenly you're on an incline, and your wheels are here, but your frame, if it's in line with your wheels like this normally, it's actually more like this, because your weight is just in a different position. And so anything you can do to counteract that, and having a steep seat tube angle is one thing, is huge. I mean, it revolutionizes the way a long travel full suspension bike, and even a short travel full suspension bike, is going to climb. I mean, it's amazing riding a modern, really long travel bike. If it's got a steep seat tube angle, you're just kind of like, you got it low enough gear, you can just kind of elevate her up the hill. The balance of that, though, is when you get to your 80-degree seat tube angle, like some of these really aggressive, modern, progressive bikes have, if you're on flat ground, I mean, if you've ridden one, your seat is like way up here. You're a mile high, and your bars feel like they're way down here. So it's a funky thing, and the whole steep seat tube angle kind of movement is made possible by a dropper post. Because if you've ever tried riding one of those bikes with an 80-degree seat tube angle up a hill or anything out of the saddle with your saddle up, it's just all in your business. Because the steeper the seat tube angle is, the closer to where you're riding it is. So like if I'm on this bike, you can see, and I stand up, so on this rock here, this is the funky position. I stand up, I'm kind of centered here, so the seat is a little bit behind me. But if the seat tube angle is steeper, then I have to move even farther forward, or better, I have to drop the seat to get it out of my way. And that's fine. I mean, that is like, steep seat tube angles and dropper posts go together. You have to have the dropper post if you're gonna have a steep seat tube angle. And it's a great thing to be able to do that, because like I said, it totally revolutionizes the way a long travel full suspension can climb. On a hardtail though, you don't squat back. Your center of gravity does go back, but There's nothing to squat down. If you tire a little bit, your suspension can unweight a little bit in the front, but it's a relatively small change. And especially on a short travel front suspension, you know, on this bike, I run 15% sag because it's 100mm travel. And so that extra 15 millimeters, it's just not a huge difference that makes. And this bike is one that comes with a non-dropper, like a standard straight seat post with actually a little bit of setback, like classic seat post. And I think you look at the geometry of this bike and it is designed to have the ability to be okay running without a dropper post. And you think back to, you know, bikes not so long ago before dropper posts were a thing, and that's a big thing. You know, you need to be able to get away from your seat if you're going to leave it at full height. As far as like the biomechanics of it, you know, you look at some people's position these days. I mean, you look at like Dylan Johnson and Lachlan Morton and stuff doing some of these crazy things, like super far forward, like mega steep seat tube angles. I mean, some of Lachlan's setups are just amazing. I mean, I'm just like, how do you ride that with your seat like this and stuff? But he does it. He's amazing. And I think there is, you know, there are arguments to be made for better power output there. But in listening to a lot of interviews on the subject, I would say the jury is still a little bit out. You know, some people definitely say, yeah, you can get more power. You're kind of more in this like sprinting thing, but it's gonna like go through your glycogen more quickly, and it doesn't activate as wide a range of muscles, so you're gonna wear out more quickly. I don't know if that's true. I'm paraphrasing roughly. I don't remember all the specifics, but something like that was the argument with there. And I do think, you know, if you go back and you look at historical seat positions, there has been a pretty damn long tradition of a 73-degree seat tube angle, somewhere right around there in road bikes. And those are bikes that are, you know, people are gonna be on them for a long time. And from my experience, you know, building bikes for a long time and experimenting with some seat tube angles, I would say from a general comfort perspective, unless your legs are, you know, very long, you know, very long calves, that type of thing, I would say just like out of the average leg dimensions, you know, that's a pretty, in that 72 to 74 degree seat tube angle is a pretty solid ballpark. And so I would say it's worth at least considering, you know, what has worked for people in the past. There might be some wisdom to that. There might be some reason that they chose that. So when I hear people say, oh, you know, it's a hardtail, it doesn't have a steep enough seat tube angle, I think it's really important to put some context on that. You know, if this were like, you know, progressive hardtail, like Mycotic is 140mm travel, that has a steeper seat tube angle than this, and I think it's good because on that 140mm fork, I do have more sag. You know, even a 15 or 20% sag is more distance. So once your weight transfers back and maybe you lose some of that sag, you are moving rearward more, even though it's just in the front. It's not increasing. You're not doing the double thing that happens in a full suspension where your front is lifting and therefore you're transferring even more weight back, and then that's compressing even more. So it's like there's more going on in a full suspension. It's a more dynamic system. But on that bike, I think having a steeper seat tube angle than on this bike is very appropriate. But on this bike, being a short travel bike that's designed to potentially be used without a dropper post, I think a 73, 74 degree seat tube angle is very appropriate. And this, you know, what I measured on this at my saddle height, which is about 800 to the top from the center of the bottom bracket, 800mm. So from the center here to the center of the bottom bracket, so that's actual seat tube angle that isn't thrown off by the bent seat tube, because a lot of, you know, companies will often measure to like a theoretical position just here, or sometimes you'll actually see measurements just at the top of the seat tube, and that's very, like, that's not what the actual angle is. If you look at this, you know, straight line from here to here makes this look like a much steeper seat tube angle than it is in actuality, because you've got this bend down here that means as you get the seat post higher, the seat higher, it goes farther back. So, and that's true with like most full suspensions, all this stuff. So look at the actual seat tube angle too, because there's just a lot of different ways that seat tube angle can be tricky to actually evaluate. So anyway, this is about 74 actual at my saddle height to the center of the rails. It's a 0 offset seat post. And you know, it's worth noting, this bike comes with an offset seat post, straight seat post. And I got 66 degrees up front. So anyway, I think seat tube angle is just like such a fascinating discussion. And this is an interesting bike, I think, to have like an outcry about it not having a steep enough seat tube angle. Personally, in this setup, especially with fairly low bars, and especially with 0 offset seat post, but with the saddle rails in the middle, I feel like this is plenty steep. It's comfortable, but it's also still comfortable to ride on flat ground, which for a cross-country bike feels very appropriate. Especially, this is kind of more like, for me, kind of like a cross-country / gravel bike, kind of adventure bike, and that's something you want to be comfortable for like an all-day riding position. And you know, we can get into the whole discussion of like Jones geometry, which is very centered, tends to have very slack seat tube angles relatively. Though again, if you actually look at the actual seat tube angle on those, it usually ends up being like somewhat reasonable, somewhere in the 70 to 72 degree range. But those are extremely comfortable bikes to ride all day. Just, you're very centered, and your weight is very much balanced on your feet. Whereas when you get a really steep seat tube angle, you're more likely to be pitched forward onto your hands. And that's fine if your bike is mainly designed to climb up a steep fire road and then drop the seat and bomb down something steep. You want that elevator thing. But if you're looking to go on a long, you know, all day kind of ride, or maybe a bike packing trip or whatever, there's a good argument to be made for having a slightly slacker seat tube angle, a more centered, I would say in many ways more balanced weight distribution. So that's a kind of a long-winded response to some of the things about this bike. I don't know, I hope that maybe provides some interesting context for any of you out there who have been wondering about the effect of seat tube angle on bikes. And I guess my goal with this is to show that there is, as with pretty much anything, a lot of nuance with it. It's not simply steeper is better. Steeper is definitely better in many situations. Long travel, full suspension, stuff that you're just wanting to go up, you know, take the elevator up kind of thing, as in climb up something super steep, but not necessarily be on flat ground much. The whole steep seat tube angle in road bikes, gravel bikes, you know, thinking about like Dylan Johnson again or something like that in Lachlan, that's a whole other discussion. And I have experimented with that a bit, and I'm not 100% sure what I think of that yet. It's only been a few years of really heavy experimentation with that. But mountain bikes, I think there are some pretty clear guidelines and some pretty clear use cases where steeper is better and slightly less steep is better. So I hope you enjoy that little discussion, and let me know if you have any questions. Let me know if there's any other, you know, anything about that you'd like to talk about more. Hope you have fun out there. Like and subscribe. Thanks for watching.